called How To, in case you didn't see it. The How To folder, I fill it up with tips, extra tips for you, how to think of your problem statement. And basically, when I want you to think of your statement of the problem, I want you to think of this sequence. Okay, I have a story that I'm intrigued with. So you tell your audience or your readers about your story. Now, after you tell them about the story, you highlight where is the problem in this story. How is this problem unique than anything else that any paper had tackled before? You want to tell me the so what from your research. You want to tell the people, now this is how I'm going to tackle this problem, and this is how I perceive it, and the merit of my research will add value to, and then you tell me who is it going to add value to, who specifically will be interested to read my paper, and then how is it helping and how it's different than anything else in the field. That's basically your problem statement. And then your research questions, you'll have to follow specific design for a research question. In quantitative research, you really want to ask questions that are not necessarily focusing on how things are done or why things are done this way, but more of how frequently, or questions that are measurable to basically understand a specific or gain results of a specific experiment. Okay, like how much, how many, how often, to what extent. These kinds of questions are quantitative more than it's a qualitative. In qualitative, you really want to ask about in what way or how things are happening or why things are happening this way, WH questions. I have these tips for you to look at examples and non-examples of research questions. And then how to write a literature review, and we discussed this by first you have to find the right sources, and we looked in the library to find how to find peer-reviewed literature, how to find trustworthy literature, what kind of references that I want to have in my literature review. You want, in the literature review, you want to state the focus first. When you start writing the literature review, you want to state the focus of your research. You can restate the problem, you can restate your questions in there, and then you relate it and connect it to the overall perspective from the literature that you reviewed. After that, you start to discuss the literature that you read, but you need to organize it in a specific manner. You can organize it either thematically, by theme, and then which are the themes that you want to cover. So for example, if you want to cover a theme on students' achievement based on class size, small size or large size, and whether it matters for high achievement. This is one example of your papers. Okay, so when you're doing your literature review, you want to make sure that you are dividing this literature into themes. So you want to talk about class size in government or public schools, and how it's perceived, or what are the elements that affects class size. Is it demographics, cultural variation, maybe bring in some statistics on counties and how each county differs or something. Okay, so first theme is demographics. You'll talk about it, discuss it from your perspective and from what the literature says. You're going to say, according to blah, 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 he thinks that, and then you discuss whatever demographics idea that was covered. Another theme can be interactive activities and the possibility of integrating it in class sizes. It's another theme, and then you talk about the literature that you found. So, and so on. You can divide it by chronological order. Maybe things were happening this way, and then it became this way, and now it's that way, based on research and what you read. You can divide it methodologically, maybe how it's perceived from one research to another and how it's tackled from one research to another. You can say a holistic view and another, and then you discuss your views in relation to whatever you read. You can have a descriptive view. That's another methodological approach of tackling this same theme. So you want to make sure that your literature is designed in some sort of a design, rather than just dumping all of everything you've read right there. This is more of a descriptive summary of literature, and this is not what you want in your literature review. You're reviewing literature. It means that you are making sense out of your literature in connection to your ideas. So put your ideas and themes and then discuss each one of them in relation to the literature that you read to support your ideas, basically. And then the last thing, so problem statement, questions, literature review, and then the last thing that we're discussing now, or the last module, is methodology. And we're discussing qualitative and quantitative. I really hope that this quick review can catch you up a little bit from what we have done so far, and the lectures that we had, the videos that we had, information provided for you. So that would be neat too. All right, now let's go to our PowerPoint for today. And I prepped a short PowerPoint for us, and we'll discuss each one of it, and hopefully it will make sense to you. At the end of this week, you will be experimenting or exploring your research based on qualitative design. Now, I understand that some of you, the research questions are really driven towards quantitative more than qualitative. But I want you to take this, look at the theme itself, and take that theme itself and think of it as a qualitative design. So, for example, the question about the classroom achievement, if it's quantitative, the question will be, how much does classroom size influence students' achievement? Okay? To transfer this into a qualitative research, I might say, how can classroom size influence students' achievement with students' high or low achievement? So instead of how much, which is more of a quantitative that leads into measurable data that I'm going to collect, and I'm going to have control groups, if it's an experimental design, and I'm going to have one small group and one larger group and then give them the same instructional strategies, blah, blah, blah. Instead of doing this kind of control and treatment, what I'm going to do for qualitative will be different. It will be more of, I want to explore how classroom size makes a difference. So I'm just going to make observations, maybe interview teachers and their perspectives. I'm not going to probably look at specific data to show, or comparative data to show one versus the other, but I'm more interested into what people think, how people feel, how students might think, and how might students feel about a larger or a small size. Maybe the measurable data in the quantitative will tell me that students achieving better in smaller size, but maybe when I go and perceive it in a qualitative research, students might feel that they wanted a larger size because when they're divided into groups, they like it to have larger groups, for example. So this is how they feel about it. And maybe this intimacy makes them more interested in the activity, hence achieve better in an activity. I mean, this is just an example, but this is to show you how qualitative differs in nature from quantitative. So this is my introductory to how qualitative is perceived in the design of questions, but let me go in specific details, a step by step, to actually understand more about qualitative. When we talk about qualitative research, it's really concerned with developing explanation of a specific phenomenon. And the word phenomena, this word phenomena, is really very much related to qualitative research, or something that I'm witnessing right there, and I'm observing that it's taking a specific interest on me that I want to explore. That's qualitative. But in quantitative, I really want to examine this situation because I need to solve it right now and find a solution right now. Okay, so that's more of a quantitative. So for qualitative, it focuses on a phenomenon, something that interested me, and I want to learn more about it. It helps to understand it, it helps to explore it. You want to think about why people behave a specific way, how opinions and attitudes are formed, how people are affected by events, how and why cultures have developed in a way they have the differences between social groups. So this is how it evolved. In qualitative research, it is really multi-methoded and it's really interconnected together. One method leads to the other, and the data from each method supports the other to get to the final social exploration. So when I look at a phenomenon in a social, cultural, or any setting, and it starts to intrigue me, I start to think, how can I explore to understand more about this phenomenon? I want to know how people think, why people think this way, and how can I solve it? Then I start to develop my methods, and the methods, because of the nature of qualitative research, it's very subjective in one way or another. I need to make sure that I have different methods in collecting data in order to make sure that this subjectivity of a decision is based on rich research and exploration within the field. What does the qualitative research study then? It really studies people. It studies situations that people are immersed into it in very natural settings. we're trying to make sense of situations, we're trying to interpret the phenomena, and we're trying to make a broader understanding, create broader understanding for the greater good, for society, for a specific culture, for a specific setting where many people are concerned to understand what this phenomena or why this phenomena is occurring. Okay. The person who conducts a qualitative research really has to understand a lot about qualitative research, about the different methods that come under qualitative research and the different ways of analyzing this in order to be able to find the final fabric of or be able to design the final fabric of qualitative research. Without being so, or without being aware of all of the different aspects of a qualitative research, a researcher will find something missing in the rigor of the design. Now, I prepared something short about how it evolved, how qualitative research evolved. In the longest history of research was one mono type of research, which was quantitative research. And then from the 1900s, around the World War II, more aspects into our societies started to develop, which are human beings, how they feel, their psychology, the way they perceive things, the way they understand things, the social structure that are starting to create, the different phenomenon that are starting to evolve based on the economic and social and political situation at that time. None of the quantitative research studies or designs was able to actually tackle such sociological issues and discuss them in a manner that is analytical enough to make sense and understand why things are happening this way and how things happen and how people react differently from one situation to another. This just kind of understanding was not evolving yet. So with the rise of the new political and economic situation around the World War II, this rise of interest for another type of research started to take place. So researchers started to replicate quantitative research, but in a manner that actually tackled sociological situations and issues. It worked for a little bit and it started to evolve, but there were many concerns about the reliability and validity from quantitative researchers when they look and read qualitative research, because of the measured data that was used to take place is not available anymore. And there wasn't another name for this kind of research. There was always this kind of dilemma whether this is measurable or valid research or not. Then came the modernist phase, which is the post-war, the 1970s, and that's when sociological participants observed or attempted to observe research in a different manner, different than quantitative research, and they started giving it different methodological designs and approaches that started to give a new name of qualitative research. it started to grab the attention, of course, at that time because of the nature of study. It's more about understanding the other, understanding phenomena, understanding how things are happening in this manner and why they're happening this way. What are the things that we can do in order to understand each other more and make difference in others' lives? These kinds of conceptual understanding, it started to grab the attention of researchers. Then qualitative research started in the blur genre, which is something that gave it high standard and perceived as equal as quantitative research. This difference is starting to blur out, basically, the difference between quantitative and qualitative, not in the design, but in the importance, in the manner that was perceived. This manner is starting to, both of them were starting to be perceived as equal and as important as each other. You can read more into the details of the bullets, but I'm giving you the highlights, the understanding highlights, rather than just reading through the bulleted points. The crisis of representation, and that's when a new way started to take place and integrate itself more into qualitative research, which is anthropology, or the study of culture. It made research and writing more reflexive and called into questioning the issues of gender and race. So it became more critical, towards critical theory and towards critical analysis and towards grounded theory, which is theorizing information, and creating new information out of mere incidents and phenomenon going on. So that was kind of a new twist, a big twist in understanding qualitative research and the depth that qualitative research can actually provide in the realm of anthropology and sociology. And then the last phase is the current phase. The qualitative research and theories are beginning to be more defined, more accepting to the different types of designs under this qualitative. So you'll find more narrative studies, more case studies, more grounded theories, and more qualitative generic studies that combines several ones together. And that's basically where we're at right now. Now, going back to the difference between qualitative and quantitative, and I talked about how the language is different even in the way you state your question, but I also want you to understand the difference in the perception, or how it's perceived. Qualitative research is perceived subjective because how quantitative researcher will look at it, if you don't have numbers, you don't have the ultimate truth. This idea of the ultimate truth is created by quantitative researchers, and they called anything that might be influence the data to be just limitations. But in qualitative research, they look at all perspectives and they take it in consideration, and not in an attempt to generalize information, but more to shed light on and explore a specific phenomenon. But I don't want to give you my final analyze data as the only ultimate truth, basically. Qualitative research is holistic. It looks at different methodological approaches. Like I said, you interview, you observe, you take notes of situations happening, and then you make sense of all of this and describe what happened. But in quantitative, you're really in a process of putting a situation or an experiment, starting a treatment or observing, and then reducing from the data to a final data result or data analysis. So it's more a reductionist, where you're collecting to find a final answer, but in holistic approach, you're looking at different perspectives and trying to shed light on it and show the different ways of reasons why this situation is happening, or why or how this is occurring. Before I go dig more into the next ones, I want you to pay attention to this, to what I just said. In holistic, you're exploring, but in the reductionist, you're experimenting. You see the difference here in language? That's something very important, and you have to be sensitive when you're writing your paper. You don't, in a qualitative research, you don't say, this paper is to experiment the situation, blah, 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 and you talk about your problem. You are actually exploring. You are not experimenting. You are not trying to find a final end of or a specific final result for an experiment. You are rather holistically exploring the different aspects of one thing using different methodological approaches, and shed light on all of these and come up with a list of results that can lead us more towards understanding the phenomena. So you are not really experimenting to find or to reduce for a final result. That makes sense. Okay, so that's why I wanted to get back. And now, in qualitative, you're looking at a phenomenon in order to understand or help people understand why and how things are happening this way. But in quantitative, you are really looking at causal relationships, scientific reasoning behind one thing is happening and the other thing is happening. What is the causation here? What is happening here? How can I eliminate this, and how can I find the final result to help solve the situation? In qualitative, and we're going to get more into detail in the next slide, what is anti-positivist and what is positivist. So in qualitative it's anti, and in quantitative it's positivist. In qualitative it's descriptive, and in quantitative it's experimental, and that makes sense from what we've just explained, that you are describing holistically what the phenomena is, but in the quantitative you are experimenting the scientific relationships in order to reduce data to a final result. See, I used all of the above here to give you the difference in meanings and in design. We're going to come to the next slides to talk about how is this inductive and how is this deductive. Okay, so let's go to positivist paradigm. It emphasizes that human reason is supreme and that there is a single objective truth that can be discovered by science. So if you're guessing positivist is a quantitative research, then you have the correct guess. We just mentioned it above, but here, hearing the language, the terminology that's used when you're describing a quantitative research differs completely from how you describe and use the language and terminology to describe qualitative research. So let's look at non-positivist. Questions the assumptions of a positivist paradigm. It argues that our society places too much emphasis on science and technology versus human beings, their feelings, their understandings, their perspectives. Argues that this ordered, rational view of a human being and consumers and students and any part of the society denies the complexity of social and cultural aspects and impact on how people think. The theoretical approach. Deductive versus inductive. I want you to guess which one is the deductive. So deductive, it seeks to use existing theory to shape the approach which you adapt to the qualitative research process and to aspects of data analysis. So in quantitative, you are using deductive theoretical approach. Theory is already there. You're not concerned about theorizing anything, but you're rather interested in making sense and understanding more about a situation with measurable data. So you are deducting data from an existing theory. But in the inductive, you are actually creating the theory. You're interpreting things from data. You're theorizing from data versus taking from the data to find results, if that makes sense. So if you are inductively researching a topic, then you are actually do not have the theory, but you have a lot of things going on. You're making sense of them in order to make the theory. But if you are researching deductively, you have the theory, you're not interested to find the theory, but you really want to find out the results of the data. So that's the difference between qualitative and quantitative. In qualitative, you're inductively exploring to find theories behind things. But in quantitative, you're deductively looking at specific things happening, and you are the one who's making the data and the results. The data is not occurring naturally, basically, but you're providing the treatment, the situation, in order to find out the measurable data from that. That's why the non-experimental quantitative research is really borderline between qualitative and quantitative research. The only difference between quantitative non-experimental research and qualitative research is that quantitative non-experimental uses methodology that is based on numerical approaches such as surveys and questionnaires. But in nature, they're both qualitative and non-experimental, both use pre-existing situation that's happening. You're not creating a situation to find the data, but the situation is there and you're theorizing it. Okay, so let's move to the differences in tangible terminology. Types of research. So in here, as we just said, it's exploring, and here it's experimental. It's more descriptive, and here more on the causal relationship of scientific situations. The types of analysis, you're really interpreting and describing data based on what some quantitative researchers might call it subjective interpretive analysis. But in quantitative, it is very statistical and numerical driven data. The researcher has to have the required skills, which is understanding all about qualitative research methodology and analysis in order to be able to conduct a qualitative research. A researcher has to be socially intelligent and able to track down incidents and things happen and read through the lines of human interaction and make sense out of it and analyze it. But in a theorist in a quantitative research really has to have an understanding of the tools and statistical tools that they're going to use in order to analyze data, but that's about it. It can be actually done very mechanically rather than needing human thinking to come up with the measurable data at the end. In the sample size, you really want to have in qualitative research a small size versus a huge or large sample size, because you have to communicate with your samples. You discuss with them, you interview them, you observe them. You want to understand and connect more about their feelings in relation to the situation that they're at. So if you have a very large sample, you will not be able to actually make connections and analyze your data. But in quantitative, because it's numerical based, you want to prove with a specific solid percentage that this is the case, and that supports the results. So the larger the size is, the more valid and reliable in a quantitative research. And the types of questions when you're doing your questions with your samples, you always want in qualitative research to probe your questions. You want to make them open-ended. You want to make sure that you have a follow-up question. But in quantitative research, like we see in a non-experimental, if they're going to use an interview, the questions will be very systematic. I don't have to meet with the person that I'm going to give the questions for. The questions can be answered in a systematic way and we're done. But in qualitative interviewing, you want to have follow-up questions. You want to understand more. You want to dig deeper into an idea that your participant had just talked about. So there's a clear marginal line between the differences in both, but what matters for me the most, because I'm pretty sure that you understand the difference between quantitative and qualitative, and you'll understand more about it. But what's most important, and what I found as a beginner researcher was helpful the most, and I really had to learn it myself, is by trial and error, of course, is the language, the difference in language that you use. So when I talk about qualitative, I want to talk about exploring versus experimenting. When I talk about a situation that I'm studying, I want to refer to it as a phenomena versus causal experimental situation or study. When I'm talking about validity and reliability, I want you to remember that in many qualitative research, it is replaced by trustworthiness versus validity and reliability. and the terminology used. And I have a handout for you with all of what I just said, the lecture itself. I'll have it in the same folder with this PowerPoint to just make sure that you have all of the information I just said now. So trustworthiness is replaced for validity and reliability because, again, in quantitative, you want to have clear-cut information, and it's very specific in what is valid and what is reliable. But in qualitative research, it is more towards addressing your subjectivity by saying how trustworthy this subjectivity is. So you are really, in this section, you're addressing your subjectivity and telling me, why should I trust this information? How valid could it be, and how trustworthy could it be? Versus in an objective research, it is clear-cut what is valid and what is reliable, and why it's not. Another thing that you want to understand about is when we have a group that I want to explore something with in a qualitative research, it's called a focus group. And that's when I'm combining a group of people and I am exploring specific ideas and feelings, and I want to hear more from them about how they perceive it, and I want to observe how they're going to react towards it. That's a focus group. But in quantitative, I have a control group where I actually provide a random sampling of it. I'm not doing it in a specific manner, and I want to have a specific treatment to see how it will impact them or influence them. So focus group versus control group. Focus group is a group of people that join together and discuss or be observed or interviewed about a specific phenomenon. But in control group, they go through a specific experiment, and you are collecting the data from them. They are not directly interacting with you, but they are following or undertaking the experiment or the treatment that you are exposing them to. Okay, so just to make sure that you know the difference even in terminology. Perspectives for qualitative approaches. Now that you have a phenomena in a qualitative research and you want to explore, and you are using different methodological approaches in order to explore it, you just want to make sure, how are you looking at this phenomena? Do you really have a specific question about this phenomenon? Then if you have a specific question about this phenomenon, then you're using the modified analytic, about this typo, it's modified analytic approach from the narrow question, and you want to have a universal explanation or understanding of this phenomenon. But if you start your research with a very general approach, then you are really looking at not specific information, and you want to come up with the question and sample to gain more understanding of it.